Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ontario Cryptids. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Sunday out there today. Today we have 3 stories that I found on Reddit. And each one of these stories have a bit of paranormal to it, and 2 of them have paranormal mixed in with cryptids. So I think you guys are truly going to enjoy this one. The first story is going to take us all the way out to the Netherlands, and then we're going to fly back to the States to finish off story number 2 and 3. Now, before we move on to the stories, I do want to thank you guys for your continuous support and also for commenting. I truly enjoy reading your comments as well. Let's see if we can get 50 likes on this video. All right. Go grab yourself a beverage and get cozy on your couch or chair and sit back and relax. For this first story, we're flying all the way over to the Netherlands. Now, the later events takes place sometime at the end of 2020 to the beginning of 2021. Hey guys, this is my first post. So, I'm living in a small seaside town in the Netherlands. In the Second World War, this town was completely bombarded by the British Royal Air Force to inundate the Walcheren Peninsula and cripple the German occupation force. The RAF, or Royal Air Force, targeted the dikes and seawalls around the town, whereupon the majority of the German bunkers stood. The town I live in took a great toll. 152 inhabitants died during the bombardment, and at least as many German soldiers perished in their bunkers. In the present, shadow people are being seen and half-transparent figures as well. I have on multiple occasions seen translucid figures in period clothing appearing from places that are just not possible, as well as more solid figures just at the end of reach of the headlights of my car. A few weeks ago, I was driving around with a friend, just strolling a bit, and we both saw a solid, hunched-over creature running inhumanly fast in front of the car, exactly in the place where once stood the so-feared German bunkers. There also is a playground where my dog refuses to pass by at night. This playground is situated on a place where, until the terrible date of the 3rd of October 1944, stood a windmill, wherein 44 people who sought protection from the bombs drowned when the sea flooded the land when the British Air Force had successfully bombed the dikes around the town. Sorry for the bad grammar, I'm not a native speaker. I love this story. Please don't be sorry. Your grammar was actually wonderful. I mean, if English was not your native tongue, you did a great job writing this up. I loved how you tied in the historical aspect of the World War leading up to what people are seeing around your town, which I find very fascinating. What struck me the most was the last bit you mentioned about that solid, hunched-over creature running inhumanly fast in front of the cars. In front of your car, I should say, not cars. And the fact that your dog doesn't like to pass by certain spots because of the loss of life there. And obviously your dog is sensing something paranormal happening there. It is not an unusual thing to have paranormal activities occur where there's been a huge loss of life due to some tragic event. And in this case, it was during the war. So we do tend to hear a lot of this happening where the dead just roam. They still roam the last place that they were alive. But again, what strikes me odd is this hunched over creature. That kind of seems out of place. It does not seem like it's an apparition. That seems like it's something more cryptic. But anyways, thank you so much for your story. I truly enjoyed it. And thank you again for allowing me to share it. For this second story, we are going to fly back to the United States, to Dallas, Texas, where this story takes place on September of 2016. In 2016, I was an administrator at the middle school in Dallas, Texas. It was not unusual for me to get up to go to school to do work on the weekends. This day was a Sunday in September around 2 p.m. It is a large school building with a capacity of 1,100 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. It was built in 1997. I was changing the letters to the message on the marquee in the front of the building, so I had to make a few trips from the front office to the outside of the building where the marquee is. I was the only person in the building. I have to arm and disarm the building's alarm. I would send out a message to the teachers if they were allowed to come up to the school when I was working, but on this day, I did not tell anyone I was going to be working, so I expected to be alone. I was almost finished and went down the hall past 3 offices to use the restroom. While I was in there, I heard the heavy front office door open and close. It's an older building and the doors are heavy-duty metal, so they kind of bang shut. Then I heard 2 female voices talking and became faint as I assumed they were walking towards the main hall of the school away from the main office and restroom that I was in. I thought it was odd because I had not sent out the building will open up from blank to blank email, so no one should have been there but me. Still, teachers work a lot on the weekends, and I thought they saw my car and felt okay to come in. As I walked back to the front, I looked down the main corridor. Even though the building is huge, a person can still see from one end to the other because each end had a glass foyer. I didn't see anyone. No big deal. After about 15 minutes, I finished what I was doing and was going to leave. This would require me to arm the alarm system. A false alarm incurs a $500 false alarm fee from the city. Since I thought some other teachers were in the building, I needed them to leave with me. So I got onto the public address system and made the announcement. If you are working in the building, please call extension 25200 because I'm about to leave. I waited and began turning off the lights and packed my things. About 3 to 4 minutes passed and no one had called up front. I looked out the front window to see if I could see any cars in the front parking lot, but there weren't any cars. At this point, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I got a bit weirded out. I made the announcement one more time in case they didn't hear me. To be honest, I would have crapped myself if the phone was to ring because I was pretty sure the voices I heard were not teachers. Needless to say, I was really creeped out, grabbed my things, armed the alarm, and hustled out. I drove around the entire building to make sure they weren't parked in another parking lot and to verify no classroom lights were on. All the lights were off and all 4 parking lots were empty. The alarm would have been triggered if anyone was in the building and left after I left. That would definitely freak me out too if I thought I heard voices in a building that I was in. I'm curious though what the history of this building is, if there was perhaps a fire or something that occurred in the past and people died as a cause of it. Interestingly, though, that you mentioned that you didn't think that the voices were of teachers, but they were definitely 2 female voices. Interesting. Thank you so much. Loved your story, and I'm sure everyone else is going to enjoy it. All right, so this is the last story of the day. This one's a little bit longer, and it takes place somewhere in West Virginia in the summer of 1987. I grew up in the densely forested rural area of central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in, and it had a nice, soft, mossy bank on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads and no mosquitoes, because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch. But we made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek bank and spend a whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have a picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same point we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found a creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in a wonderful giddy mood. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and sat back out to find a creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and cooler. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about an hour of walking, we came upon what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, a bathtub, all sitting arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun and eventually we should come upon a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way and we began yelling at each other out of fear, and let's be honest, little girls can be bossy. I told her if she thought she was so right, she should go her way and we would see who got out first, so we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat and also an idiot. Worst possible thing that we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slowed down so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was marched my pace. I slow down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or there was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came upon something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little head out while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is a truly horrifying part which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkened woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have ever seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black, it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like a nausea you get when looking through binoculars too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sounds of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud. I mean, really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run towards the thing chasing behind me either, though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark, and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour, until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over the hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozy blood, and more exhausted than I have ever been in my whole life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost. And my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in, beaten up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come and find me, and if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. At the request of Babies Turn Blue, I will leave a link to this story in the description below. Now, what a fantastic story, and I loved how the story was told. Each time I read it, I was moving through as though I was watching a movie. Absolutely phenomenal. Now, this has a couple of really interesting points to it. One, was there a Bigfoot in the woods with her? Two, was there something else going on in the woods besides the Bigfoot? And, I know everybody has their different beliefs when it comes to Sasquatch and Bigfoots, and whether or not they have any connection or ties with UFOs or paranormal or anything along those lines. This story here kind of ties the paranormal activity, perhaps UFO, in with Bigfoot. At least that is my interpretation of this story. And that is all this is, guys. My interpretations. I'm sure everyone else reading this may read this totally different than I did. And that's perfectly fine. But what a fantastic story. Absolutely loved it. So that is going to wrap up the stories for today. If you guys out there have a story that you would love to share or like to share, And again, you don't have to give me your name if you don't want to. That is perfectly fine. But what I would love is at least a general location and timing of when your story took place. So again, if any of these stories jogged your memory, please go ahead and forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. And I will be more than happy to share your story on my channel. So, that is all for today, guys. Have a fantastic Sunday, and we will see you all next week.